Radio Voice Italia.
Philadelphia.
Class is now in session. Christopher Columbus University is on air from Philadelphia and broadcasting worldwide from within the shadow of Marconi Plaza. Radio Voice Italia is proud to present a recurring segment with civil rights author, professional researcher, and renowned Christopher Columbus expert, Robert Felix Petrone, Esquire.
Buongiorno tutti, and welcome to Radio Voice Italia's Christopher Columbus University, where we teach you the truth about the greatest hero of the 15th and 16th centuries, Christopher Columbus, and update you on the international efforts to preserve Christopher Columbus's legacy. I'm your host, Il Professore Robert Petrone. Today on our Christopher Columbus University segment, we have a news update. In Syracuse, New York, poet and university student Justo Antonio Triana, I wonder if he's related to Rodrigo de Triana, the Spanish sailor on Columbus's first voyage to the Americas, who first spotted land. He has issued a public statement decrying the city for simultaneously calling for, quote, diversity and trying to remove its Christopher Columbus statue. Mr. Triana correctly characterizes the statue as, quote, a piece of well-preserved evidence of our city's multicultural past and diversity of thought, ideologies, ideas, political views, and worldviews, end quote, and condemns, quote, those who have blindly consumed the fashionable narrative about Columbus. He's referring to the lies of Columbus as a racist, rapist, maimer, murderer, slave trader, slave owner, grifter, and genocidaire, quote, will applaud the cancelers of Columbus for their apparent courage and historical empathy, but in the long term, the one that should concern us citizens, this will leave a terrible precedent, the imposition of an absolute vision of the world from one political spectrum on another, end quote. Yes, Mr. Triana has hit on an important point. These diversity, equity, and inclusion types are using opposite speak to refer to themselves and only want diversity of superficial characteristics like skin color or sex. What they don't want is diversity of thought. And that is why they are dangerous authoritarians who should be stripped of their power. We are seeing the havoc they wreak, and they glory in it like the sadistic monsters they actually are. In the substantive portion of today's class, we conclude our 6-part series zooming in on each of the 8 slanderous myths about Christopher Columbus. As I said, that he was supposedly a racist, rapist, maimer, murderer, slave owner, slave trader, grifter, and genocidaire. What I cheekily call the RRMMSG slanders. Now, my hope is with these 6 classes that in the future, when you hear or read someone utter one of them, or one or more of them, you can send that person electronically the link to the class in this series that debunks it. And who knows, maybe after listening to that, they'll be interested in listening to the other classes in the 6-part series. And then maybe they'll even be interested in listening to the rest of the episodes of Christopher Columbus University and actually learn something. So classes 35 and 36 covered the R's, classes 37 and 38 covered the M's, and I added genocide to the murder episode because they're pretty much the same thing, except genocide is on a larger scale. Class 39 covered the 2 S's. So all that is left is the last G, grifter. Now, why do I use the word grifter, and what exactly does it mean? Well, I'm referring to the accusations that Columbus stole from or cheated the tribal peoples of the West Indies. I needed another G for my RRMMSG slanders, and grifter was the only synonym for cheater and thief that I could think of. Plus, it's broad enough that it actually encompasses both theft and cheating, which aren't exactly the same thing, but do both fall under the broader term grift. So Webster's 9th New Collegiate Dictionary defines grift as, quote, to obtain money, and money is in parentheses, illicitly as in a confidence game, and as in a confidence game is also in parentheses. Webster's 2 New Collegiate Dictionary, as in Roman numeral 2, defines grift as, quote, money made dishonestly, a swindle or confidence scheme to practice swindling or cheating. So the term is very apropos for the final catch-all regarding the 8 slanders we always hear against Columbus, and it provides alliteration. And also, you may recall that I defined what a conspiracy is in the earlier episodes of the 6-class series. You can go back and listen to the beginnings of any of those episodes if you still need a refresher. But the important point about conspiracy, at least in the criminal context, is that all conspirators are just as guilty of the underlying crime of the conspiracy as the main actor, and are just as guilty of any other crimes any of them commit in furtherance of that conspiracy. So today I'm going to debunk not only the myth that Columbus was a grifter based on any actions of his own of stealing or cheating, but also debunk the myth that he was a grifter through conspiring with anyone else who stole or cheated. So what kinds of theft or cheating do Columbus detractors accuse him of? Basically, I can think of 3. Number 1, claiming to have discovered lands if they were already occupied. Number 2, stealing tribal lands. And number 3, cheating tribal peoples in trade. So let's look at how the primary historical sources flatly debunk any accusations that Columbus stole from or cheated anybody or conspired with others to do so. Let's start with the complaint that we use the word discover, or that he used the word discover to describe how he found the Americas. First of all, Columbus never claimed to be the first one there. All his writings back to Europe about the Americas acknowledged the existence of the tribal peoples. In fact, Columbus never even claimed to be the first European there. From studying ancient writings all his life, Columbus believed the West Indies to have been settled centuries prior by the Carthaginians in ancient times, and held by the ancient Spanish kings as recorded by Aristotle, including King Hesperus, descendant of Tubal-Cain, who was mentioned in the Bible as being the first blacksmith. What's more, he wasn't the only person, nor indeed necessarily even the first person, to call his landfall a discovery. All of the European historians of the time, including Bartolomé de las Casas, Hernando Colón, Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo, etc., 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 all used that term to describe what Columbus did. Because from the European perspective, or even the Eurasian perspective, or even the Euro-Afro-Asian perspective, that's what he did. He brought the Americas to light to the rest of the world. But even from the perspective of the tribal peoples, you could say, he discovered us way over here on the other side of the Atlantic, isolated from the rest of the world, all the societies of which had already made contact with one another except for us. The tribal peoples of the Americas were the last peoples to be united to the great global unification that Christopher Columbus perfected. So he wasn't being a charlatan when he used the term discover. That's a perfectly legitimate term to use to describe what he did. Look, if you're going to sell and leave your house, and in a fit of nostalgia, you bury in your backyard a time capsule containing all your fond memories of your life there, and years later, the new homeowners happen to dig up the yard to build a patio or something, and they find your time capsule, is it wrong to say they discovered the time capsule simply because you already knew it was there? No reasonable person would take objection to the use of the term discovery in that context. So the real grifters here are the people who play this semantic game with the term discover to vilify Columbus or diminish his accomplishments or portray him as some kind of charlatan. They're the real charlatans. All right, so how about those who claim Columbus was a grifter because he, quote, stole tribal lands? Well, ladies and gentlemen, if that's the case, then every single society on Earth is a society of grifters, except perhaps for anybody living in that tiny 1-acre plot of land in Africa where the first hominids started to walk erect. Migration, colonization, and settlements are as natural to human beings as breathing and blinking. If humans didn't colonize, we'd all be living very uncomfortably, shoulder to shoulder, in that 1-acre patch of land in Africa. And Columbus's vision was to settle alongside the tribal peoples as co-settlers. Remember, the tribal peoples were not indigenous. They migrated to the American continents from Asia via the Bering Strait over ice bridges that had formed during the Ice Age. They were colonizers. In fact, as I reported in the news portion of episode 35, the first of this six-part series, recent archaeological evidence found in Blackwater locality number 1, New Mexico, an archaeological site between the towns of Clovis and Portales, has revealed that there were people here in the Americas 11 to 12,000 years ago, during the prehistoric Pleistocene era, long before the colonists, who later called themselves the Taínos and the Cherokee and the Aztecs and the Iroquois and the Mayans and the Sioux and all those tribes, ever got here. What happened to these Pleistocene peoples? Well, all those tribes I just named stole their land. How about that? And you might argue, well, Professore, you're speculating. For all we know, those Pleistocene people died out and all those tribes took over empty land. Well, that may be. But we do know that constant tribal warfare existed among most of the tribes of the Americas, even up to the moment that Columbus and the other Europeans got here. And those tribes continued to fight each other even long after the Europeans got here. Remember, in episode 28, we had a guest lecturer here on Christopher Columbus University, Mr. Mark Onewolf. He told us that the name for his people, Apache, was actually not their real name. They identified it as Chiricahua. The word Apache was the word for enemy in the language of a rival tribe. And it was the rival tribe that spread the name Apache among the Europeans, who thought it was what the Chiricahua called themselves. And what were all these tribes fighting over in the Americas for as long as they've been here? Each other's land. And in the Caribbean, the Taínos told Columbus that the Caribs took their land from them. And guess what? The Taínos took their land in Cuba from the Siboney. And the Siboney took their land from the Guanacatabey. And we don't even know who the Guanacatabey took their land from because the Caribs probably killed them all. But interestingly, Columbus had no intention of following that model of warring with other tribes for land. As I said, he wanted to create separate settlements in unoccupied patches of land for the Spanish settlement. He had no intention of displacing any of the tribal peoples. The Caribbean is vast. There was more than enough land for his settlements and the tribal peoples without forcing anybody to move. In fact, Columbus actually worked with the Taínos in coming up with a location for his Navidad settlement. He and the Taíno chieftain Guacanagari of Hispaniola worked together, even came up with a mutually beneficial treaty whereby Guacanagari helped Columbus find a nice patch of land for the Spanish settlers. That's respect, not conquest, not aggression, not any of the Marxist hate mongers' buzzwords they like to use to paint foreign colonies as somehow evil. Columbus wanted Spanish settlements to be a model for the rest of the world. He didn't steal anybody's land, but the tribal peoples had done so through warfare for millennia. All right. Lastly, there's the tired old claim that Columbus cheated the tribal peoples in trade. Now, you don't hear this one much because Columbus detractors hang their hats on much more provocative falsehoods. But to round out our six-class series on the 8 Slanders, here's what the primary historical sources have to say to debunk this myth. Columbus never, ever, ever cheated the tribal peoples in any trade or bartering. In fact, he went around on his first and second voyages, and to a lesser extent on his third and fourth voyages, giving gifts for free to the tribal people. They loved, above all else, hawk's bells, the little jingle bells that falconers and ostrichers used to train falcons or hawks. They liked to wear them as earrings. Columbus also handed out for free beaded jewelry and clothes. No, he did not hand out articles of clothing or blankets infected with smallpox. You're thinking of the siege of Fort Pitt in 1763. That's over 2 centuries after Columbus, where British Deputy Superintendent General Alexander McKee, who was actually half Shawnee, And British fur trader William Trent gave a group of tribal delegates blankets from the Fort Hospital where smallpox patients were convalescing. There is no evidence that McKee or Trent even knew about the viral transmission of pathogens through contamination of inanimate objects, what scientists call vehicle-borne transmission. But back to the 15th century. While the Tainos enjoyed the gifts they received from Columbus, they wanted to trade with the Europeans. On October 13th, 1492, early in his first voyage, Columbus landed on an island populated by Tainos whom he characterized as being so, quote, very eager to have the things we bring that they will, quote, give all that they possess for anything that is given to them. They were particularly fascinated with, of all things, the tips of the shoelaces of the Spaniards' boots. And the shifty Spanish sailors were all too happy to trade their worthless shoelace tips and broken crockery for things of greater value, like parrots, balls of cotton, thread, and spears made of reeds. But Columbus would not allow it. He insisted the Spanish settlers give them, for these things, objects of at least equal value, like hawks, hawk bells, beaded jewelry, and clothing. He wrote of the Spaniards' attempts at cheating the Tainos, quote, I should like to forbid this and let no one take any cotton except at my command, end quote, so that the sailors could not exploit the Tainos with unfair trade. That's from his journal entry of Saturday, October 13th, 1492. In fact, he insisted that his sailors, quote, give as much as they were asked by the Tainos in bargaining with them, and got, quote, angry with the sailors when they did not. That's from his journal entry of Wednesday, October 17th, 1492. Columbus wrote to the Crown in his October 15th, 1492 entry, quote, when, God willing, your highnesses send others here, we shall be received favorably, and the natives may give us of all they possess. Note he says, give us of all they possess, not give us all they possess. There's a big difference. He's talking about fair trade, not theft. Now, that's not to say that there weren't Spaniards who stole from the tribal peoples without Columbus's permission. Columbus couldn't be in all places at all times. And the Hidalgos who made up the second settlement, the Isabella settlement, were in constant revolt against Columbus because he wouldn't let them cheat, mistreat, or enslave the tribal peoples. One of the worst of these Hidalgos was the alcalde mayor of the settlement, sort of a judge and mayor, Francisco Roldan. Roldan and his Hidalgo conspirators rose up in constant rebellion against Columbus, often armed rebellion. Roldan stole the crown's tribute, tried to assassinate Columbus's brother and lieutenant governor, led a military coup to take over Fort Concepcion, sacked the Isabella settlement, plundered its flocks, led a band of mutineers to Jaragua in western Hispaniola, and incited the Carib warlord Guarionex and his marauders to attack Columbus and the settlers. And here's the kicker. Roldan even tried to cheat the very Carib warlords he manipulated into helping him. He extorted gold from their new high king, Manicao Tex. Roldan was a bad dude, and he was constantly at odds with Columbus. 3 years before Columbus's death and less than a year before Queen Isabella died, Columbus wrote a letter to the monarchs dated July 7, 1503, in which he stated that he had intended for Spain that their, quote, settlements would be an example to others. In that same letter, he lamented that that had not turned out to be the case due to the treacherous Hidalgos. He wrote that letting those who opposed his governorship, quote, enjoy the profits of the Indies was, quote, a bad example detrimental to both trade and justice in the world. He warned that those, quote, asking for licenses of exploration often intend only to come out and plunder to the prejudice of the undertaking itself. But even those treacherous men Columbus described as, quote, a quantity of people who do not deserve baptismal water before God or the world, had gone about cheating, robbing, and engaging in unfair trade. Columbus was not only not one of them, he prohibited them from doing so when he was governor. And he continued to speak out against them when his term was over. When it came to his own personal trade practices, Columbus always championed fair trade and fathered what we today call the Columbian Exchange, where Europeans brought to the tribal peoples of the Americas, citrus fruits, grapes, bananas, peaches, sugarcane, honeybees, onions, olives, coffee beans, wheat, rice, barley, oats, cattle, sheep, pigs, and horses. And in return, the rest of the world received Native American sweet potatoes, squash, avocados, peppers, pumpkins, pineapples, peanuts, potatoes, tomatoes, corn, cassava, and vanilla. But the Columbian Exchange was really more than just mercantile goods. Christopher Columbus initiated more than 500 years of cultural, economic, and political relations between the old world and the new, commencing an enduring exchange of science, technology, law, commerce, art, music, literature, and people, benefiting and enriching the globe from pole to pole. Columbus was no grifter, nor was he a racist or rapist or maimer or murderer or slaver or slave owner or genocidaire. Columbus was the bringer of all the good things Americans, North Americans, Latin Americans, and South Americans enjoy in the modern Western world. Instead of accusing Christopher Columbus of turpitude, try acknowledging him with gratitude. You'll never meet a grateful person who is an unhappy or indecent person, like the Columbus detractors or other detractors of Western culture. And you'll never meet an unhappy or indecent person who is a grateful person. Gratitude, therefore, is the mother of happiness and decency. And that's today's class. For more news, articles, and resources about Christopher Columbus as the first civil rights activist of the Americas, icon of Western culture, paragon of Catholic virtue, and greatest hero of the 15th and 16th centuries, visit preservecolumbus.us. That's Preserve Columbus, rendered as one word, .us, and post a little note of appreciation for our webmaster, Tom LaCosta. I'm your Professore, Robert Petrone. A presto!
The Jersey Shore has fun and sun, sand and sea, and Radio Voice Italian.
This is Radio Voice Italia, USA,